Welcome to the Making of You podcast. We have a ton of talented friends in entertainment, advertising, and media, and this is our chance to sit down with them and hear their stories. My name is Ryan Huffman. I'm the founder and owner of Huffman Creative, a production company that creates scalable cinematic content all around the world. Today, I have my good friend with me, TJ Hoover. He is a talented creative director and lighting designer, and also the co-founder of a company called See You Later that does some of the biggest live performances in the world for music artists. TJ, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, well, so to kick things off, I would love to hear a little bit about, your background and how you got started. I understand that you started your interests at a young age, but would just love to hear kind of your early beginnings and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I started really young. I think growing up in Florida, we constantly went to church, right? And so church was such like a big part of the culture down there. And I wouldn't say I was like a church kid. Like I didn't really enjoy necessarily going to church like multiple times a week, but I was really fortunate enough to go to a church that kind of had like what I would call like a Six Flags Over Jesus type of like production setup. So you had like the coolest lights. So you had a giant like LED wall. We had cryo cannons, lasers, like all types of like fun gags and stuff. And so I started like volunteering in church when I was like 15 years old. So I started out in kids' church and I had like 4 little lights that I would sit there and play with and just like mash buttons and stuff like that. And eventually graduated from there into like the youth church, which was in the bigger room, and kind of worked my way up. And I kind of fell in love with it, and I think just started spending, every hour in my free time over there volunteering, pulling up lights onto trusses, hanging them, like anything and everything I could do to just like get my feet wet and like learn in production. I would skip like high school and go there on like days off before the conventions where we were like bringing in all this extra gear to like learn how it worked and stuff like that. So I'd say at like the earliest age, that's kind of where I kind of got my foot in. And then, from college and stuff, I worked in clubs, around the city for free as like a stagehand. I would work in churches there as well and stuff, and just really took like every opportunity I could get to, I think like hone in on my craft and like just do, at the time it was just lights, and like that's all I wanted to do. I always wanted to go to LA, had never been. The only thing I knew about LA was what like Grand Theft Auto taught me. So I was like, screw it, let's go. Packed up my car and just told everyone I was moving here. And then, I knew if I told everyone that I would be like pressured to go. I wouldn't want to like cop out and not go, right? So I knew I'd have to like give it a shot. So I just packed up everything, drove, and, haven't looked back since.
So in your earlier days of kind of learning everything that you could, like were you always trying to do different departments or different areas of the show? Like, did you fall in love with one over the other out the gate, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I guess what was really cool about the church environment is like they're kind of built on volunteers, right? So they'll like let you volunteer anywhere like you can. And so I had the opportunity to try audio and some other things, and I just really liked what lighting did. I liked how it was visual. I liked how it could like induce emotions and, like I think change the room and change the atmosphere and kind of push and pull on people's emotions. So that part I think I was like really drawn to naturally. And so I kind of fell into that and, I think honed in on that craft for, quite a few years until I started discovering like other parts, that I think I enjoyed. But that happened quite later.
Awesome. And you just mentioned a good point. I always tell people who are younger that, you can't always work for free, but sometimes volunteering allows you a lot of opportunities to try new things. And it sounded like that's something that really helped pave your way.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I would hit up like successful lighting people on the regular and just be like, let me come work on your show for free. There was, whenever tours would come through at the clubs, I would stagehand and just try to be like the best stagehand, loading their stuff up as quick as possible. And I'm like, take me on the road with you. Like I'll sleep in the back lounge. I'll like work for free, like just doing whatever I could. Most people said no, for probably a good reason. Like they wouldn't want to have, I guess taken advantage of me or something like that. But there was a few people along the way who definitely, gave me the shot and like kind of gave me opportunities and, maybe saw a little something in me. So
awesome. So once you got to LA, what was that first job for you that you can remember to kind of like get your foot in the door when you were out here?
Yeah. So the first thing I did when I went out here was I immediately went on tour with PARTYNEXTDOOR. And it was a festival run through Europe. It's actually quite funny. So I had no reason to be out there. Like my skill sets were not up to par. Out of the 10 shows we had, time code, which is basically the system that allows us to like play back the elements of a show all in timing to the tracks. Out of 10 shows, it failed 10 times. And every single time in retrospect was my fault. And it was like a very, very simple mistake. And I always say like, luckily they were all daytime shows because I was doing lighting, right? And so if it was night where like my lights really mattered, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today, but we like skated by, you know, and just, I guess, faked it till I made it. And you believed in myself a little too much, but I gave it a shot.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
On that tour, like, did you meet other people that gave you another chance, or what was your next step after that?
Yeah. So the time I was working with this company and like kind of helping them build that, so I was just going on the road for them. So I had other opportunities that came up through the company for about like a year or two when I was with them. The people I've met on the tour, I still know some of them to date. You know, some of them are like Tyler Henry and stuff from Sturdy. You know, actually met those guys on that tour. Tyler, Adrian, and CJ, and kind of all of those guys. So definitely met a lot of great people on the way. They've seen me from the beginning when I was a scrub. So
to kind of touch on like, I think kind of your steps that you started making in your career, like what was the climb like once you kind of got your foot in the door, you started to learn a little bit more? Were you working as a freelancer? What direction were you kind of going when you were first starting?
Yeah, so I was working as a freelancer at the time, and I think I kind of came into the industry, you know, it was pre-pandemic. There wasn't a lot of like YouTube videos or anything like that. So you really had to be like self-taught and I think like brought into it. Whereas like now you can kind of learn and, you know, it's a little bit more of a streamlined pathway, I think. And I was really kind of trying to figure out what my like specialty was. So, you know, there's lighting designers, lighting directors, programmers, all of that. I had a computer science background, so I kind of naturally fell into, you know, some of the programming stuff. And I was making little plugins and things like that. And what I would do is I would release the plugins for free. But every time you would use it, a pop-up would come up and it would say, created by TJ Hoover. And you had to click OK before you like could use the plugin. So I was like, this is just like free marketing. And so I just gave it out for free. And I had this one plugin that helped the programmer on the Pink tour at the time. And he like DM'd me on Facebook, which I like just never check. So 4 months later, I look at my like Facebook and I see an inbox message from him and he's like, yo, I used your plugin. It saved me like a ton of time. You should come by the office and like meet people. And so his name was Eric Marwinski out of this company called Early Bird. And he's been like a fantastic mentor ever since. Has introduced me to a bunch of people. And I think the industry's kind of small. So once you're kind of around for a little while, you start to see the same faces over and over again. So I think as time kind of went on, you know, I kind of solidified my place in the industry by just, you know, kind of still being there and not ending up somewhere else, I suppose.
Awesome. So that journey of like building these plugins, like what is that process like to make those? Like, is it pretty complicated? Like,
not really. I mean, I think it starts with like, I don't want to say I'm naturally a lazy person, but like I don't like inefficiencies. And so there's a lot of like repetitive tasks and stuff I was noticing in my own work that I was like, you know, it'd be really great if I never had to do this again and like something else would do it for me. And so that's kind of where a lot of the ideas stemmed from. And then I would just write something, honestly, to save myself time. And I would just give it away, you know, for like the marketing side of it. So it's just some simple, you know, it's called Lua, which is just an off of C. So it's pretty simple.
And how did you distribute it? Like, how did you market it and how did other people find it?
Yeah. So there's all these like lighting Facebook pages and groups and stuff like that throughout the internet. And I would just kind of post it there. And I had a little like Wix website that would like, you know, have it downloaded on. I could track like how many people from around the world were like looking at it and stuff like that.
So do you remember a time specifically maybe where you maybe were given a chance by someone to really prove yourself that really elevated, you know, or took you to the next level in your career around that time?
There's definitely been a few of those moments. I mean, I think looking back, you know, you don't always notice the path that you're kind of taking, but I think when you look back in hindsight, you know, there's these moments of like key decisions that kind of changed your trajectory, you know, for the long term. One of the big ones for me was like my first festival that I did. Is one of my friends who was kind of a mentor and like teaching me lighting and stuff, couldn't do one of the shows in our like hometown festival. And they needed like a lighting person. So like I did it and spent like weeks building my own like lighting file. And I was so nervous, had never done this before, and like went there and crushed it, hired like a photographer to come take like photos of me at the lighting console and like was super into it and stuff. And that was like the first time I had ever done a show like that on my own. And I think what a lot of those moments are is kind of maybe just proving to yourself that you can do it more or less than, I think I had the confidence after doing that to say yes to like other things that maybe in the past I would have been a little bit more reluctant to. So I think, that was the biggest moment for sure. I think that kind of got my foot into like, oh, I can do this like professionally.
And when did you start to experiment with other types of like live shows? At what point was that?
Yeah, so I think post-pandemic, the pandemic obviously was like the worst thing that could have happened to live music ever. Like we were arguably probably the worst hit, right? And so I think I naturally had to figure out what's next. Like either I moved back home with like my parents or something, or I just learned to survive. And so I started like picking up film stuff and like dabbled in editing, dabbled in directing, dabbled in producing. And I was like, oh, I kind of like producing. Like this kind of works with my like programmer, but also creative brain at the same time. And then when the pandemic obviously lifted and live music came back, I learned so many skills from film that I brought back over to live music. And I think by that point, I was just interested in other things because I was forced to be. And so, I think as I learned about producing and then like stage design and some of these other parts of the show process, I just naturally was like, oh, that seems cool.
I remember when you and I, around the time that you and I first met, it was when you had been producing and you had learned a ton of the production world. I remember that's when we first met. And I wanted to hear like maybe specifically on that, like what do you think were some of the skills that you learned that you were able to improve, your I mean, now later with your company, but just like maybe you took back and learned from working in film or a different medium?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's the problem solving. And, I think as a producer, you kind of have your hand in all departments and all facets of, whatever's going on and what that project is. And so I think being not hyper focused on, let's say just lighting and kind of having my hand in like everything, taught me how to kind of problem solve and, kind of balance and, maybe like, I think strategizing in kind of that way that maybe I hadn't been used to prior. So I think that was a big part of it and just the logistics of it too. So like during the pandemic, shooting in LA was like really difficult. So you would go to like Northern California and you would go to all these other places. So I was organizing travel and budgets and getting a van to like drive everyone up to like Central California to shoot something and that type of stuff.
Also, I mean, with producing, whether it's a commercial or music video, especially when you're getting started, there's so many of those things that you're just having to like figure out on the fly.
Yeah, there's like an upset neighbor or something like that you have to go diffuse or...
Yeah, we used to have this producer who used to work with us, and we were planning a shoot in the middle of a forest that we've never shot in like a distant state. And I told him when he was like, what am I supposed to do? And I was like, I'm going to give you an honest answer. I was like, you and I are starting from the same place. I've never shot in that state. I've never shot in a forest, and we have the same amount of information. So knowing that, like, where's the steps you're going to take now to solve that problem? And he kind of was like, that's a really interesting way to look at it, because it's like, even though I'd done it a lot, doesn't mean I'd done it before.
Yeah.
So I always tell people that to encourage people about the problem solving, because you're right, producing is like, you really get thrown through it because there's so many, every time there's a new problem you have to solve.
Everyone's looking at you as being like the guiding voice, and like you just have to have the answers.
So to go back into the live world after COVID, like what was this next steps that you took in your career from there? I know you shortly after is when you started doing your own company, but I don't know if there were other steps before that led you to that.
Yeah, so when the pandemic lifted, I had the opportunity to go on one more tour. And so I went out, I programmed the like Doja Cat show and like went out with her as her like lighting director. And she was this is during Planet Her. So it was kind of been, a very good time to, I think, be a part of that camp and stuff. And so I did that for about a year. And I think after that, I was like, man, I'm good on the touring stuff. I actually really enjoy being home, go figure, and not living on a bus with 11 other people for months out of the year. Honestly, I feel like the growth and changes in my career have come from like a couple of things of just like simply changing my Instagram bio to being like, I'm now a lighting designer. I'm not a lighting programmer anymore. Like, don't call me for that. And just telling people that. And, honestly, I think I had done good work and worked with like notable names and like other roles in the past. And I think, that helped validate, that I might be able to do it. That, along with some people on the way who definitely gave me, the opportunity and the shot to
actually do it.
Yeah, to actually do it for sure.
I think that is such a valuable thing, is like being able, if you can't do it, you still put yourself in a position to say that you believed in yourself that you could do it, you know, and then someone was able to give you the chance to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's either crazy or a belief in yourself. I don't know what it is, but it's worked so far.
I think the belief in yourself. I mean, I think you know, when you put yourself out there like that too, I think that's when you get given these opportunities, you know, to try new things. And also the perception of it too. I love the shades in the bio. That's great. It's like, oh yeah, you can do it, so I'm just gonna do it. That's awesome. Do you remember I guess the first time where that change actually allowed you to do something different? Was there a specific moment?
I think I realized that worked when I went from a lighting like director who would tour to like a programmer. And that was the first time that I was like, okay, let me like define myself to the world, that I'm no longer a lighting director, I'm a programmer, right? And so I saw that worked, and I think, you know, that's just kind of been like a consistent theme as I've changed job titles and roles 5 or 6 times, I feel like, in the last 10 years. So
just for maybe people listening, like, what are the differences? Like, what do those positions do? What are their responsibilities?
Yeah, so lighting director is like kind of the person who tours with the artist, you know, throughout the year, right? So they go to all of their shows, their events, things like that, and they make sure the brand is like consistent across, you know, the world and all these different places. The programmer is someone, a lot of these shows are you know, built in advance. And so when an artist plays back a track, the lights do the same thing, whether you're at show A or show B or show C, to allow for that consistency. And so the programmer is the person who programs the actual show itself and says, I want these lights to do this, that light to do that, and kind of has a little bit more creative freedom on what's happening. Whereas the lighting director is a person who's translating that show and copying and pasting elements from it to these different venues with different lighting rigs and different positions and things like that, to help achieve a sense of consistency. Then there's a lighting designer who designs kind of where the lights are and what the general aesthetic and vibe of the show is. And different lighting designers work differently. Some are really involved on like the cue by cue of what's happening, and some are more just broad picture, here's the vibe, aesthetic, and kind of allow some freedom to the programmer to interpret that in their own way. So it's kind of broken down in those 3.
Is there a hierarchy with those positions, like in terms of like who's over who?
Definitely. So the designer's like the person who's ultimately in charge, similar to like a director on a film. Then the programmer, you know, would be like your DP, right? And so then, you know, below the DP is your camera op, which would be your lighting director.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Fascinating. Thank you for breaking that down. After you started, you know, doing this a little bit more, what was the process like with starting your own company? Were you given like an opportunity to do it yourself, or what did that look like?
I think that kind of derived from seeing the opportunities. So I think after the pandemic, one thing I realized is that, you know, all these artists who had previously worked with, you know, consistent designers prior no longer had, you know, necessarily, there wasn't any brand loyalty anymore, right? So you had gone without working with someone for years. A lot of people left to the industry and changed. And so I think, you know, the disruption in the industry due to the pandemic, I just saw a market opportunity of there's a bunch of people out there going back on tour, totally open to working with new people, and, you know, let's take advantage of this. So I had a friend, Darius, who's my business partner, and we had worked together a ton during the pandemic and had known each other prior. And, you know, I was starting my own thing. He had his own thing, and we were like, you know, let's just team up and kind of take advantage of this, you know, opportunity in the market at the time, and, you know, see where we could take it.
Where did you guys come up with the name? What does the name have any symbolism or anything?
It does. Yeah. So like we wanted to have, you know, some sort of like meaning to it. And I think, you know, a concert or a show is sometimes an experience that for a lot of people, it's, you know, their best day of the year. Like they save up money, you know, for months sometimes to go to these events, and, you know, they post about it, and, you know, when they look back on their lives, they remember the concert they went to and 19 blah, 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 right? So it's a very special, like intimate moment for a lot of people. And so see you later kind of derives from, at the end of a show, you know, what you say to your friends is like, see you later. What an artist says to their fans is like, see you later, see you next time. And so it's kind of like an homage to that of like, this isn't the end, you know, we'll see you the next time around and stuff.
So now that you are a few years in, like, what has been the climb with your company? I mean, now you've worked with quite a few artists, have done some huge tours. What has that growth been like for you as a company?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, it's grown fast, right? And so I think similar to producing, it's problem solving, right? And so it's, you know, doing something you haven't done before and, you know, learning how to do it along the way. And it's just been a lot of challenges, you know, I think nonstop challenges, to be honest, right? And it's like, how do you overcome them? And like the whole thing feels like a puzzle, and you're constantly just like figuring out how the pieces fit together. But that's honestly the exciting part about it. I think that, comes from like producing or, being on the road. Most of your problems as a line director are solving issues, right? It's all this technical equipment that gets set up in a day, for these concerts. So you can imagine everything's going wrong, always. Things are breaking, lines aren't working. So you just have to know how to problem solve those things. And so I think growing a business has been similar to that, of just nonstop problem solving, but maybe across like a wider degree of, categories.
So what now has been different? I mean, obviously starting your own business is a lot different than being just a designer. But what have been some of the things that you've taken away and learned from being both a business owner, separate from just when you were off on your own?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When you're a designer, you look at things through like one lens, right? And it's just like this creative lens where everything is like artistic and great. And, when you're running a business, there's like responsibilities. Like it almost feels like having a family to a degree, right? The decisions that I make, affect not just myself, but, like other people. And so I think there's a great deal of just like pressure to, make sure you're like stewarding those responsibilities well, because, that it doesn't just affect you anymore.
Now, when you're like looking ahead at like some of these other shows and things that you're doing, what is your responsibility as a business owner for these tours, for these clients, for the people on your staff? What does that relationship look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it all falls back on like Darius and myself, right? So, if anything in the show and the process that we're kind of overseeing, doesn't go well or isn't perceived well, it's ultimately our responsibility, right? And so I think it's like stepping into realizing that and, making sure that, all the processes and stuff like that are just like well thought through, and well planned and like well executed, because we have this saying in live music where like you're only as good as your last gig. And, so much of our work comes from like the reputation and like what we do. And so I think it's stewarding that is the most important thing when it comes to like getting a lot of these jobs.
So how many tours and shows are you doing in any given year?
We're doing anywhere between like 20 to like 30, usually projects within a year. So it's quite
so many.
It's quite a lot. Yeah.
I mean, I guess this is just would love to hear you break this down, like the difference between planning a tour versus planning, a Coachella set or something. What does that look like for you? And the differences between those types of shows?
Yeah, I mean, tours are more long-term, right? So usually it's kind of built around a campaign of, not just usually one tour, but a Europe tour, an Asia tour, an album release. And so there's a bit more long-term kind of planning on, I think shows that kind of involve tours. Then there's one-offs where, an artist is just doing a Coachella or just doing a Lollapalooza or something like that. And that's more, you're building something to, kind of be experienced one day and maybe never again. They both have the same amount of work. It just depends on how long that work is kind of extended.
Because the touring side of it too, a lot of the times you're having to really bake in and analyze like is travel, transportation, and all those other elements, right? The budgets and things, it's a lot more logistical in that sense, correct?
Definitely a lot more logistical, and luckily we are involved on like the actual producing of the tour itself. So, whether the show is one show or 24 shows, I think how it affects us is whenever we're designing something, it doesn't need to be designed in a way that allows for it to be broken down and set up over and over again over the course of months, sometimes years. Or is it something that can be put together once and then, it's put in storage afterwards? So I think as far as the people and the logistics go, we aren't so much involved in that, but creatively we have to find solutions that, help work for whatever medium they're kind of using this for.
As a business owner now, what are the departments and the things that you are overseeing? Obviously budgets and things like that, but like who are the teams? What does that look like from like a structural standpoint? Because I know you probably can't do all of it now that you're a business owner.
Yeah, it takes an army for sure to like put on these shows. I mean, you have lighting, you have content, you have stage and scenic, you have choreo, you have wardrobe, you have creative, then you have technical execution of all these things. So it's not just enough to have ideas, it's working with the vendors on like what is actually possible due to like physics and like simple things like that. Now I'm in a much more like upper level position where I'm working with a lot of these departmental leads on kind of how their departments are looking like from a health standpoint and an execution standpoint, and like helping solve problems along the way, and just ensuring that, the vision creatively of what we were anticipating in the beginning is, being brought to life, as the process goes along.
So very similar to kind of what you were saying of like producing a music video commercial, except it's like similar skill set, just different departments, but you're still managing and leading teams and controlling numbers and making sure that everyone's doing what their focus is, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting. Film is so much more organized than live music is. It feels like we do live music with like half the people that are on a film set. I think that is due to probably a lot of like union stuff and laws and things like that. But there isn't like producers in like live music world. You know, usually
I was going to ask who that was. Who's the one that's leading the charge of all of those people?
You know, there's production managers and like tour directors who are, you know, dealing with logistics and, you know, overarching budgets. But it's usually up to the designer to be kind of the creative producer or, you know, person who's working with all these departments. There's not really a producer role. You start to see a little bit here or there now with what we call like a creative producer, but I know maybe like one or two people who are like capable of doing that. And I think it's just a very niche skill set, right? You don't go to school usually for live shows. You kind of just learn it. So there's not really a lot of opportunities to, I think, learn it other than just somehow finding your way into it.
That's interesting. I haven't heard it being as a creative producer. That's so interesting. Because you're kind of like, well, you're like the director and the producer in a way.
Essentially, yeah. You're the one finding all the people, calling them, setting up meetings. Yeah.
Is that person also typically the one in charge of the budget and making sure that everything's okay, or not really?
Not usually the budget. Usually someone else kind of handles that. But it's more, yeah, the execution of the actual product itself is... There's not many people who know how to, or even know the contacts to call to put together.
Exactly. So now, you know, looking ahead, I mean, and also maybe also looking back, but what are some of like the things that you would tell yourself now when you were just getting started based off what you've learned? I mean, you're still really young for all these accomplishments, but I'm just curious to hear some things that maybe you would have given an earlier aged version of you some advice.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think one thing is maybe be patient. I think I've always been a very impatient person where I'm like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And like, slow down. Like, you know, you'll get there. I think another thing is like dream bigger. You know, being a touring lighting director was like my life dream when I was like a kid and stuff. And I think to have achieved that so young, I was at a point in my life where I was like, cool, well, like I have hopefully a good 60 more years left. What else am I going to do? And luckily enough, I've been inspired by other things along the way, and my dreams have kind of changed. But I think, you know, dream bigger is like a really big one for sure. And, you know, you're going to go so much farther than you think. And so, you know, don't let that kind of hold you back.
I love that. What are some of the things that have been those bigger dreams that you've accomplished or are looking forward for?
I love a challenge. And I think if something's not challenging, I'm like not fulfilled at all. Like I love the adrenaline rush of like, oh crap, like we have to figure this out. And like, that's really exciting to me. And I love like figuring it out and just having that like, whew, we did it type of moment, you know, over like a cheers of a beer at the end of the night or something like that. And so I think some of my other dreams are just things I find interesting. So like I'm starting, you know, an experiential exhibit in Denver that is like a merge of live music and art. I'm an advisor on a PE fund over in New York that's like acquiring, you know, hotels and stuff like that. And I'm kind of helping oversee a lot of the experiential side of it. You know, another agency that's more kind of like directed at like corporate clients like a Coke or a Spotify. And so I think just all these different, I think business in general is kind of where maybe my interest is now. I think simply because it's such an umbrella of things and you can apply business towards anything. And so I think, you know, that's kind of where my focus has been at the moment.
Awesome. I always say this too, after running a company for a while now, it's like the skills that you learn from running a business are just irreplaceable in so many different ways, beyond just experience. You said it kind of earlier, like just doing the thing and is how you learn so many of these things. And then that skill set though of running a business, you know, the things that you learn from legal to payroll to accounting to like
stuff you maybe don't want to learn, but you have to.
Learn it. Yeah. At one point or another, you learn it. And then also then like moving forward to starting new business ventures and new things, like you're so much faster because it's like second nature at that point. To touch on the experiential part of it, like, do you see that as an extension or a branch maybe that your company is going to maybe continue to develop and pursue in the future? Maybe with more like experiences, but more towards brands and events?
For sure. We've done a couple of them. And I think basically what it is like leveraging kind of, the coolness of live music into like other spaces, right? And so if concerts are some of people's favorite times of, favorite moments of the year, then how can we take the experience that we give them in those spaces and apply that towards some of these experiential, events that as of now kind of feel a little cookie cutter and like very repetitive. So whether that's like a pop-up at Coachella or, like an NBA Jordan event or, some sort of like brand release or something like that. So I think it is an extension off of kind of the platform that we've already built. So now it's, how do we leverage See You Later talents and stuff like that and, use that to expand to other areas that maybe we weren't able to before.
And also events, while and experiential, while they are different, there's also still so many similarities between like what you're doing, whether it's with lighting and maybe you don't have a choreographer, but you still have like set design and people still show up and they leave and the whole thing. There's a lot of similarities. I mean, I've dabbled in events too, and even though it's different than producing a commercial or video or movie, there's still those things,
It's close enough.
It is
that you can figure it out.
Yeah. The event side of things of like the thing about events is like I feel like you plan them for so long, like all the work. I mean, I know you do the same with shows and tours too, but like I just feel like events I've talked about for like 4 or 5 months, and then it's just you typically don't have more than one event. Would you ever throw like your own events, whether that's like a show or I don't know? Is that something you'd ever consider? Just something that just popped in my head.
Yeah, years ago, me and some friends did this thing called Night Rinse, where we would throw like
I remember when you were hearing about that.
Throw little like underground raves in like LA, Denver, New York, and stuff like that. So we did that for a while. And they started in college, then brought me on it later as I kind of like met a lot of the guys and stuff like that. So we did that for like a few years, and I think as we kind of like all got older and a little bit more into our careers and realized the profitability isn't really there, and throwing events is like really hard. You don't get bar splits out the gate and stuff like that. So to be profitable in this, we lost a lot of money. Essentially, we were like, maybe we're not good at this, maybe we should try these other careers. But we're really good friends, and we found other ways to partner with each other and stuff throughout. So I've tried it. It was a lot of fun, I think, at the time, but
I did the same thing where I actually threw like underground late night parties. Yeah, we did a few of them right when I was getting into producing.
Yeah.
But it was like same thing where I was like, this is costing me a lot of time and money. My clientele, because it was also like a late night, was not the best clientele. And I was just like, I don't know if I'm going to do this anymore. But I learned a lot. It was a lot of like figuring it out. And it was right when I was actually kind of starting to learn how to produce like commercials and music videos too.
It's one of those things that also feels like it goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
But then you're like, I think I'll stick with that.
And also, speaking of what you said earlier of that adrenaline rush leading up to an event where you're like running around and like setting things up and plugging things in, you're like, is this working? Is this? And then it's like, that is ultimate problem solving on the fly. Events are the same way.
Yeah. Especially when like some of these events are like technically illegal too. Yeah. And you're like, just
absolutely.
Like, I hope it doesn't get shut down. Like.
Yeah. Well, great, man. I mean, just looking forward to the rest of the year. What is something that you're excited about right now and looking forward to?
And kind of our See You Later timeline, like 2023 was all about kind of just like, that was year one, getting our foot out there and establishing. Year two was all about growth and kind of like building consistency. And really establishing the name. And then now, we're in year three, and year three is about like really solidifying our presence in the industry. And so I think, the growth we've had the last couple of years has been like phenomenal. And I think this year, we're expected to grow, almost double what we done in like the years prior. And so I think just preparing for that is kind of what I'm like mostly looking forward to, and bringing on some new team members, growing the team. We have, some projects obviously that are coming up that I'm excited about, but we're in a very like cool growth period. And so I think I'm really excited to kind of ride that wave and, see where we end up at the end of the year.
And what are some of the things that you're looking forward to just like for yourself, like personal growth or just your own trajectory?
Yeah, well, I turn 29 next month. So, 30 is like peeking its head at me. Yeah. And I'm just like, I'm starting to get to that point where it feels like life is like blinking by. And I'm like, oh crap, like, I have some things on the bucket list I need to like start checking off. Like, so I think I was telling you, I want to go to Asia. That's something I've always wanted to do, is backpack through it. And, I've been to India, but that's the only place. And Asia's a huge continent, right? I want to go way more than just one country. And I'm turning 30 next year. So I'm like, I have to do it before I'm 30. I've had a sailboat for a few years. I still don't know how to sail, but it's just like sitting in the marina. And I'm like, maybe I should learn how to sail that thing before like I can't sail anymore or something. So I think it's just, I focus a lot on work, and now it's like, okay, how do I start like rewarding myself a little bit and doing at least something here or there?
I forgot about that boat. That's pretty funny. I remember you told me about when you got it.
It's just sitting there.
Do you go out on it ever?
I've gone on it twice in like 3 years. Yeah.
Also the traveling, man. I mean, that's you've traveled, but that's like the most, you and I are talking about that. It's so rewarding. Talk about like living and learning and problem solving too, and you're just out there by yourself.
Figure it out.
Yeah, it's so fun. Do you know where you're going yet? All the places, or is it just an idea?
I definitely have like a checklist I want to hit, and I don't know if I'll be able to hit it all in one time, but like I have to do Japan, have to do Korea, Thailand, you know, Vietnam. I want to like motorbike across Vietnam, want to do the Philippines, Bali, and some other places were also on that list. But you know, I think
it's a lot of places though in one trip.
I might have to break it up into a couple.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on today. It was great to hear your story and everything. Just for people listening, can you maybe also share just how people can find you?
Yeah, definitely. I think first off, yeah, thanks for having me as well.
Yeah, of course.
And, you know, having the opportunity to speak and stuff like that. Yeah, people can find me on Instagram, TJ Hoover. Also seeyoulater.la. You can find an Instagram page there. That's pretty much where we live most of our stuff. So,
well, dude, thank you so much for stopping by, and I'm looking forward to see what else you guys continue to do in the future, both for you and the company. So
yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Talk soon.